Welcome back to the Sanctuary Sunday School, and thank you so much for sharing this lesson with us. This week's subject is bringing first fruits, and we can find this text in the book of Leviticus in the 2nd chapter and also in the 23rd chapter. Now, this week we are still in the wilderness of Sinai. Last week we were in the book of Exodus, and Exodus pretty much is a story of the accounts that happened during the Exodus. And the word Exodus merely means a mass exit of a large group of people from one place to another, which is exactly what happened when the children of Israel left Egypt. So that's where we were last week. And we see that the children of Israel were there and they were giving in order to build the tabernacle to worship the Lord. Now, this week we moved into the book of Leviticus. Leviticus is also sometimes referred to as the book of the priests because what we find in Leviticus are the instructions that they were to use as the priests governed the rituals and the ceremonies and the sacrifices and all of the festivals that God had commanded the children of Israel to celebrate in honor, to always remember what God had done for them. So that's what the book of Leviticus is. The Levite tribe is the tribe where the priests were all from. So when you talk about the book of Leviticus, you're going to see very detailed, specific instructions on what God told them to do. And here when we talk about the Feast of the First Fruits, these instructions that God is giving them actually refer to the first harvest the first crop that they harvest when they got into the promised land. But this is also something that they were to continue to celebrate in observance of what God had done for them. Because as we can see throughout the entire Old Testament history, God was so faithful and he was always delivering the children of Israel. And I love the fact that they took the time to put and set aside days and times and observances to recognize and honor God. So today we're talking about the first fruit. Now, when we look at this, they're actually still in the wilderness, but God instructed them on what to do when they harvested the very first crop in the promised land of Canaan. And he told them, he said, this is what you have to do before you do anything else. And before I go any further with describing what the actual offering or sacrifice was like, there's a lesson right there for us, because I was reading this and it occurred to me that sometimes you have to go through the wilderness before God can prepare you to receive his promises for you. And they knew that God had given them this land and they were on their way to this land. But that time in the wilderness is where God instructed them. It's where he corrected them. It's where he prepared them to receive what he had for them. And that's something that we can observe in our lives. Sometimes when God promises us something or when we want something, we want it right away. We want to take that direct route and go straight there. But sometimes you got to go through something. Sometimes you've got to experience something before you can walk into the promise that God has for you. And when we look at, if you look at the map of the distance between Egypt to Canaan, there is no way that trip should have taken 40 years. And if you look at the line, the pattern that they took, you'll see how it loops. And they were literally wandering in circles in the wilderness all of those years. And during that 40-year span, some people had to die out. They had to learn some lessons. They had to make some changes. And sometimes that's where we are. We're stuck in the wilderness because there's some people that have to drop off of our lives. There's some things that we've got to stop doing. There's some practices that we've got to eliminate before we can really fully manifest the promises of God. So here we are in the wilderness of God, and God is telling them what to do. And he commanded them, he said, when you go into the promised land, take the first fruit of the first crop and take a sheaf of that first crop. And the priest is going to take that sheaf and he's going to wave it. And as a part of that ceremony, God commanded them to offer a yearling, a male lamb, younger than a year old. God required a meat offering, which was not the meat of an animal. This meat offering consisted of oil and fine flour. And he also required a drink offering of wine. And all of these things were part of this feast of the first fruit. And when I looked at this and I was studying this, I thought about first fruit. By definition, the word first indicates that there is more to come. So by offering God the first fruit, you position yourself to receive the rest of what God is trying to give to you. And that's something that so many of us miss, because when we get something, it's like, okay, yeah, I got this. It's mine now. And we hold on to it like it's all we have and like it's our last. No, it's not your last. It's your first. And that first fruit belongs to the Lord. And it's not just restricted to the children of Israel or to grain or to livestock or to oil or flour. It is the first fruit of everything that you have. It's the first fruit of everything that you are, your time, your money, your substance. All of that belongs to God. And God didn't stop there when he told them to bring the offering to the Lord. He also said, and when you harvest your crops, do not harvest everything. Leave something in the corners. Leave enough there so that people who are hungry, people who are poor and needy can come into your fields and they can eat as well. When you are truly a child of God, you will be a blessing to others and people will be able to eat off your plate. So this is what we see here. And I was looking at this and I was listening to this, and I love the word of God because this is such a powerful and timely lesson. There are so many people who are hurting. There are so many people who are in need and who are living in lack. And it is more important now than ever to know and understand without a shadow of a doubt that God is a provider. God did not create anything or anyone that he cannot care for. And I'm just going to share a testimony really briefly. And I was going back and forth debating on whether I should share this, but then there was a comment from one of the viewers last week that encouraged me to go ahead and share this, because as I said last week, I am a giver. My family, we all givers. I was raised to give. Everything you have to share some of. That's the way I was raised. That's where my parents are. And not only do we give in church, we just give everywhere we go. And when I say that the enemy attacked my entire family, he did just that. Me, my daughter, my parents, even my church. God, the enemy just attacked to the extent that I started to wonder. I said, okay, is this all in vain? Is this for nothing? What is the point of this? These are the thoughts that the enemy starts to put in my head. And I'm not talking about something that happened to me a long, long time ago when I was in the world. I'm talking about the thoughts that the enemy put in my head just last week. And it seemed like no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, no matter how hard I tried, everything just kept getting worse and worse. And I sat there but I couldn't give up. And I couldn't give up because more than anything else, I believe the Lord. I love the Lord. I know God is real. If I don't know nothing else, I know that the Lord is real. The Lord and loving God and trusting God, that's all I know. And if that's not real, I don't know what is. And so I couldn't let go of my faith because, again, that's all I have and that's all that I am. And I just kept going. And God spoke to me last week and he said, today is the day for your breakthrough. And I got up and I had a meeting and it looked like everything was going to work out. And I was feeling good. I went to that meeting. Everything fell apart. Nothing worked. And I was really, literally back at square one, not knowing what I was going to do. And I walked out of that office, and as I crossed the threshold out of that door, my phone rang. And typically, I don't answer my phone when I'm in transit. I'll just let it ring. And when I sit down and I'm comfortable, I pick up the phone because, I hate being on the phone and doing a bunch of things. But I answered the phone anyway. And there was a person on the other end of the phone. And she said, I have your file in front of me. Everything is all set. All I need is one document from you, and it's done. And I left there and I had to go into the office. I went into the office, and when I left there, I went into her office and it was done. It was all taken care of, just like God had promised me. That was my day for my deliverance, and God just turned everything around for me. And I wanted to share that because I know from what you're sending me and from what you're saying to me that it's not just me. The enemy is attacking, and he's trying to make you feel like by giving to God, by giving to God's people, by working for the Lord, by helping people, that you're wasting your time and that there's nothing in it and that there's not going to be not only not enough for you, he wants to convince you that there is nothing for you. And that is just not true, because everything belongs to the Lord. And if you put God first, if you seek him, if you run for him, if you work for him. And when I was going through all of that, I just said, you know what? I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to give up on God. And before I take it back, I'm going to add more to it. And again, I was saying I was reluctant to give that testimony because at this point, this ministry is growing and literally by the thousands per week. And I was thinking about how many people would hear this and if it was a message or a testimony that people needed to hear. Because at the end of the day, my entire reason for doing this is to bless somebody, to encourage somebody. It's not about Valante and the Sanctuary Academy. It's about that person who's watching, who's struggling at church, who's struggling at work, who's struggling at home, who doesn't know which way to go. It's just that person who just needs a witness to let you know that God is real and that he sees you and that you're living is not in vain. And when you talk about the first fruit, and you look at these stories that we have about the children of Israel, I thank God for the children of Israel. Thank God for Abraham. I thank God for Moses because God used them as examples and we can read their story and they are living testimonies of what God will do. It's a living testimony of how faithful God was. Think about it. They were in slavery and in bondage all of those years. And God saw fit to let them go into that wilderness. And he provided for them in that wilderness. He provided them quail and manna, and he fed them and he took care of them and he brought them through this promised land. And here we're talking about their first fruit. See, because God needed to let them know that before you, he told him, he said, you need to give me my offering before you even eat or drink anything because I am the Lord. And that's how we ended this chapter. I am the Lord. I'm your God. I am your sustainer. I am your creator. Everything that you have came from me and it belongs to me anyway. So it's in your best interest to give me the first fruit. Take it off the top. Give God what's his. And it's not that God needs anything. He's God. He is everything. But you give it to God to acknowledge that it's his and to acknowledge that you thank him and to show him that you love him and to show him that you praise him. And you also honor God by blessing other people because that is the very nature of God. God is holy and God is loving, and we should be holy and we should be loving and we should be concerned about our brothers and our sisters, and we should worship the Lord and put God first. This first fruit offering lesson is so good. And I say this all the time because we live in a society that's all about me. Me, myself, and I. And that same spirit is creeping right into the church. My ministry, my this, my that. It's not about me. It's about God. Because if it were about me, it would be limited. I was born. I'm going to die. I am not immortal. So if it were about me, I don't even want this ministry to be called my ministry or to be about me. Because if that happens, it dies with me. But if this is God's ministry, and if I'm doing what God told me to do when I'm dead and gone, people will still be living and they'll still be feasting and they'll still be blessed by the work that I did if the work that I did was unto God, if I was truly working for the Lord. First fruit. If you acknowledge God and put him first in everything that you do, he will manifest himself in such a way. Like I said before, it just jumped out at me. First, if first means that there is something else to come. And think about it. Numbers go to infinity. So by putting God first, you set the count, you start that count. And so now you can just count, I put God first. And so now everything I need is coming right behind it and it's not going to stop. It's everlasting. And I always say, I'm counting my blessings. And the way I count my blessings is 1, 2, infinity. It's infinite. It's endless, the power that God has. And I want you not to be deceived today. Don't allow the enemy to put a limit on your blessings. Do not allow the enemy to try to make you believe that God is limited, because there is nothing too good to offer the Lord, because everything is already his. And we're looking at these children of Israel in this wilderness and all of the things that they did and everything that they went through in the wilderness of Sinai on their way to the promised land. So you have to remember, you're on your way to the promised land. And while you're on your way, you might be in the wilderness. It might get a little hot. It may get a little hard, but that's okay. You've got to keep going. And then when you get to that promised land, your wilderness experience has already prepared you. You know what to do. You know the first thing I'm going to do is honor God. The first thing I'm going to do is bless the Lord. The first thing I'm going to do is bless somebody else, because God is good and he is so worthy of bringing first fruits.